Welcome to This Is Money podcast. I'm Georgie Frost, and joining me and editor Simon Lamb today is pensions and investments editor Tanya Jefferies. And coming up, the great state pension cover-up. DWP finally comes clean over a universal credit mess that could affect 6 million people. Also reprieve for those wanting to buy state pension top-ups as the deadline gets pushed back. Also today, we look at the best cash ISAs for transfers, the dividend heroes that have been raising payouts since the Rolling Stones released Ruby Tuesday, and we ask, could you afford your home now? Don't forget, you stay up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app.
Don't forget, you can stay on top of what's going on in the markets by tuning in to the Digest and Invest podcast by eToro. Go to your regular podcast platform and listen on the go. Digest and Invest by eToro, the podcast for those interested in trading and investing.
But first, an exclusive for This Is Money, which first exposed the scandal, revealed that the national insurance records of many people on universal credit are riddled with holes. After evading Tanya's questions, the government has finally fessed up that an automated system meant to update the state pension records of millions of claimants broke in 2017, and it will take another year to fix all of the mistakes. Tanya, another exclusive for you, and This Is Money. Remind us, though, what is this story about, and what's the impact on lost national insurance credits?
Well, it affects people who have been on universal credit. They're an increasing number because, as you recall, lots of people on different benefits have been put onto universal credit. So we're talking about people, with disabilities and long-term illnesses, people who are unemployed, all sorts of different things. When they started ramping up the number of people going on universal credit, it seems they started off with an automated system for updating their state pension records. They get national insurance credits towards their state pension as a result of being on universal credit. But we're now learning that it almost immediately broke. The data was being sent to HMRC, which keeps the records, but there were errors in it, and so they basically suspended it. And that was in 2017, and it's still not fixed. Well, they say that it's at the start of being fixed, and they're either starting to make corrections, or they have just started, or they're about to just start making corrections for people who had errors dating back to 2017. So I suppose that's people right at the beginning. But as of January, there's 5.9 million people on universal credit, and that's not counting all the people who were on it in the past, were on it for periods in the past and are not on it now. Now, some of those will be accounted for by people who have retired, and they do seem to have had a manual workaround, which we discovered when people within 4 months of state pension age. And perhaps the start of this correction activity means that they're getting some people's records sorted out that way. But really, we're looking at well over 6 million people, it must be, who have got state pension records that are incorrect. If they look at them today, there are national insurance credits missing, and it's undercounting what they are potentially going to get in retirement. I mean, that is obviously a very big deal for people. Now, the people who've been coming to us complaining about it are obviously aware of it, but there are also a lot of people who will be unaware of it. The website, the government website, is still saying now that credits are being updated automatically. I don't know how they can possibly be saying that when that hasn't been happening since 2017. We really had to push to get answers. The only reason we managed to get some answers was because readers were sending us individual letters they were receiving from junior DWP staff, which were giving us the details. And this week, Wendy Chamberlain, who is the Lib Dem work and pensions spokeswoman, when we did our last story, she asked a question in Parliament to force the government to give an answer. And Guy Opperman, the former pensions minister, who is now employment minister, he wrote back to her and basically he confirmed all this. So we now finally have the official version.
Is that how it came to light? People started getting in contact with you?
Yes, last autumn we had 2 emails to Steve's inbox in a week, both complaining that their national insurance credits were missing and they were claiming universal credit. And I remember emailing Steve at this time saying, 2 in a week, is it a coincidence, or not. And really on the basis of that, we started to investigate. He said, I think someone contacted me direct about this as well. I'll look up what happened in that case, because he'd helped some lady with an individual case. And when we first wrote about it, Simon will remember this, we did a mystery surround story. We didn't know what was going on, and they wouldn't tell us at all what was going on in the beginning. But more and more people wrote into us, and we sent more and more cases. The last story, you might remember, we sent them 10 cases. We weren't going to let it go. We were going to say, well, we alone have 10 cases of errors. What is going on? And we were just going to keep on asking. But as I say, the Lib Dems took it up, and at least we've got an official response now.
Why did it take them so long to give an official response? Deliberate obfuscation or ignorance?
Don't know. You have to ask them. I have asked them.
What did they say?
They haven't answered.
Oh, right, fair enough.
To that very question.
I mean, a lot of people, you'll be missing national insurance credits, but I guess some people might have been wasting money paying for extra ones that they didn't need.
I know of one case where that's happened, but we do certainly know, because we've published stories about people who have reached state pension age and the manual workaround has not worked for them. The last time we did a story, a lady got £600 back in underpaid state pension. And there was a previous case of someone at over state pension age as well. His record was still wrong. We'll keep on looking at cases, because those are the ones that are most at risk, the people who are going to waste money on top-ups, and the people who enter their retirement, their state pension age, and it's still wrong. We're not going to let it go.
Good. I would expect nothing less. But should you just assume that if you are on universal credits, then your national insurance record is going to be wrong?
Most likely. You can check your national insurance record. I think if you just Google check your national insurance record, you'll get the Gov UK site, and you can have a look. I think our stories have alerted a lot of people who are on universal credit to the fact that they are owed credit and that they might be missing, because we get emails from them about this and they've just realised it and checked. The people that we have dealt with have found it almost impossible to get either HMRC or the DWP to update their records. I mean, basically, they just get turned away. Very few staff seem to know anything about it. And the ones that do just say, well, look, until you're 4 months from state pension age, it's not going to happen. I mean, this letter from Guy Opperman does say that they are going to fix it, and they have given a date of the end of 2023-2024 financial year. So basically, April 2024 is the date they're saying that this will be fixed. But when you think about the many millions, maybe once they get the new system cranked up, they'll be able to send millions of cases over to it. But I don't know how quickly they'll be able to push that through. We'll see. But it is worrying for people. I mean, they want the record to be correct. They want to make plans based on it. That's what a lot of people have said to me. They're desperate to get it fixed, because then they can decide which top-ups they want to buy, and in some cases, when they can retire, because it will influence, how much they're gonna have, their private pensions and so on, and what they're going to be able to make it up to when they get their state pension.
Well, as you said, Tanya, you'll keep going on this one. But sticking with top-ups, and after we discussed it on the pod a few weeks back, the government has caved into pressure and extended the deadline to buy extra state pension top-ups. It's after frustrated savers jammed its phone lines for weeks. People trying to boost their state pension will now get until the 31st of July to do so at the current rate of up to £824 for each year, and less for a part-year gap. Tanya, we were discussing this, weren't we, a few weeks ago?
Yeah, we broke this story in the middle of February, because we were getting so many emails from people who were concerned they couldn't get through. Just to recap, the reason that there's a deadline is typically you can go back 6 years and buy voluntary national insurance contributions. It's £824 for a full year, but it will be less if you've already got some months or weeks stacked up. But at the moment, the special concession is that you can actually go right back to 2006 and fill gaps all the way back there, not just the 6 years. So a lot of people are waking up to the fact that they can fill gaps and that this is potentially going to be a good deal. Because of the cost of it versus what you get in state pension as a result, if you buy 1 year, you can get the money back in state pension in roughly 4 years, and it will make a difference of thousands of pounds over the course of, say, 20 years of retirement, which is why people are so concerned about it and why they got so desperate to actually take advantage of this deal. But it seems like the phones were just overwhelmed and people were getting really upset about it. One wrote to me and said, I contacted my MP as well, and he said he'd had a word with Jeremy Hunt about it. So I would imagine that MPs, it wasn't just our stories, that I reckon that MPs were getting lots of messages from their constituents and complaining as well. The DWP started relenting about a week ago, where they said they were going to accept late payments if people had made every effort to buy the top-ups. But then there's the question of, what proof do people need that they've made every effort? And actually, I thought that they'd have to extend the deadline personally, because I couldn't see any way out of it. But while the late payment issue was in play, I asked them lots of questions about, well, how is this going to work? What will people need to prove? Do they need to make a complaint? Do they need to, keep a log of all their calls to the DWP? And it was clearly going to be unworkable, and it was going to create a whole extra tier of extra admin where you were going to have to sit. They said they were going to do it on a case-by-case basis. I mean, they've got enough trouble just answering the phone at the moment. Right. So how they were going to work out whether people deserve to pay late or not, it was absolutely impossible. And in the end, it was actually the Treasury and HMRC who stepped in. They were the ones that issued the announcement, we're putting it back to 31st of July, which everybody who's emailed me since then have just said, oh, thank goodness, I'm so relieved. Mm-hmm. I'm so relieved. That has been the overwhelming message from the people ever since this deadline change.
So the question is, to buy or not to buy?
Well, you do have to think quite carefully about it. Certainly if you're in ill health, you want to be reasonably sure that you're going to live long enough, basically, to get your money back. You might want to consider it as well if you're on benefits or expecting to be on benefits, because it will push your state pension up. In our guide on this, which I've just updated yesterday, Steve Webb's got some golden rules. So I urge people to go and look at it. There's a link to it in the story about the deadline change, which is at the top of the pensions page at the moment. And he gives a sort of full rundown of what to consider, what to go through about your own personal situation. But the most important thing is to check you haven't already got a full record. Do you actually need to make it? This is the thing that people need to check with the DWP, which is why the phones are jammed. But you do really need to take a very careful look at your own record and work it out from there. Steve has not only got his golden rules, he's got a website dedicated to helping people with this, which will give them a little bit more information on top of what the government site gives you as to whether it might be worth your while personally. And it's well worth checking that out. There's a link in the guide.
Right, Tanya, thank you very much. Simon, we've not forgotten you. Sitting there patiently waiting. We're going to talk now about cash ISAs. We actually have an ISA season again on our hands. You need to use any remaining ISA allowance you might have before it disappears on the 6th of April. But don't just stick your cash or leave it in any old ISA. While rates have significantly increased, the average easy access deal now pays 2.01% compared to 0.26% last year, according to Moneyfacts. Shop around and you could get more than 3%. Simon, of the years that we've been doing this podcast, ISA season's been a bit of a damp squib of late. Is it any more exciting now, or are we just hamming it up?
It is more exciting now. The savings rates are considerably better than they were a year ago. They have risen dramatically as the base rate has risen. I mean, the problem is that you are still not beating inflation. But you've got to remember that inflation is a backward-looking measure, and the rate that you get on your savings is a forward-looking measure. If you put your money into one of these ISAs now, you aren't going to get that rate for the money a year ago. You're going to get that rate for the money from now. Whereas inflation has already done its damage to your money. It did that since last year, and inflation is forecast to fall. It is widely predicted, perhaps somewhat optimistically, to potentially be back down to 2% by the end of this year. So if you put your money into an ISA, an easy access ISA, paying you 3% now, which is what some of the top deals do, then in a year's time, you will have beaten inflation. If you put your money into a 1-year fix, Barclays has a 1-year fix at 4%, you will have got a return that is double inflation on your savings. Now there is a question as to whether you should perhaps be investing instead and all these other things. And if you want to find out more about that and more about ISAs in general, go back 2 weeks and listen to our special ISA investing and saving podcast, because that's where we talk through all the ins and outs of this. But this is undeniably good news. You can genuinely, potentially over the next year, make a real return on your money, and you can do it tax-free. But why do you need a cash ISA in the first place? I mean, everyone's got this personal savings allowance thing, haven't they? Well, firstly, what you got to remember is that the £1,000 personal savings allowance is only for those people who pay basic rate tax. If you were a higher rate taxpayer, you only have a £500 allowance. And those people who are additional rate taxpayers, who currently have to earn more than £150,000 a year, but as of the start of April, it will be £125,000 a year, roughly. They don't get a personal savings allowance at all. But let's take them out of the equation for the moment, okay? Because that's not really that many people. Although there's a big chunk of them, and we shouldn't just discard them. They pay a lot of tax. But if you are a higher rate taxpayer, then with savings rates having gone up substantially over the past year, it's suddenly got a hell of a lot easier to be pulled into the savings tax net. And even if you're a basic rate taxpayer, that is the same. I mean, if you're building up a savings pot, if you don't have much in the way of savings, perhaps you haven't built up a pot, or you're younger, you're still on the way to building it up, or you've had to use it to do something like buy a house, then this is going to be much less of a concern for you. But there are very large numbers of people out there who have substantial amounts of savings that they have built up over the years. And it's hard enough trying to beat inflation. It's hard enough trying to get a return on your money. It's been a real struggle for savers over the last decade and a bit. So don't needlessly give money to the tax man. No, because the money that you put into your savings, you've almost certainly already been taxed on when you earned it. So don't give money to the tax man. If you're going to put money into a savings account, you need to seriously consider whether it should be an ISA. And we've been banging this drum for years. There have been other people over the years saying, you don't need to worry about ISAs because you've got your personal savings allowance. Now, I personally, and Lee Boyce, previously of This Is Money, now of Money Mail, has also been banging this drum for years of, that's fine. But how do you know they're not suddenly going to whip away the personal savings allowance? It's exactly the kind of thing governments will do, much less likely to totally dismantle the ISA. And B, when rates go up, you're going to have a problem. And if you haven't got that money in an ISA already, it's going to be harder to get it in there. So that's why it matters. But as we said, the good news is rates are much better. A quick rundown of our 5 of the best cash ISAs here. This is compiled by Ed Magnus, our savings reporter and savings guru. Okay, and these are his picks of the ones that he thinks stand out the best. We've got Paragon Bank, triple access, 3.1%, £1 to open it. You can only open it and manage it online. You can make up to 3 withdrawals a year, any more and the rate will fall. But other than that, you get a 3.1% rate. Hargreaves Lansdowne, what? Hey? Huh? They're an investment platform, aren't they? They've also got this active savings platform. And it's worth checking out these platforms, actually. And if you want to find out more, go to thisismoney.co.uk/saving, where you'll find a link to our savings platform roundup. But this Hargreaves Lansdowne deal is provided by Coventry Building Society via its savings platform. And it pays the 3% rate on the cash ISA. But there's a £100 cashback incentive for those people who sign up and deposit £10,000. And that has the effect of substantially bumping up the real rate that you're actually getting on that money over the next year, for example. Then you've got Barclays. It's got a 1-year fix at 4%. Really simple account, £1 to open it. Shawbrook Bank, that actually beats Barclays. That's got a 1-year fix at 4.06%, but you need £1,000 to open that one. And then we've got Moneybox, which is its cash lifetime ISA, and that pays 3.5%. Why have we got a cash lifetime ISA in there? Because if you are a first-time buyer, if you don't own a home already, any property anywhere, any interest in it, and neither does your partner if you're buying with them, then a cash lifetime ISA or any form of lifetime ISA is a bit of a no-brainer, because you get a 25% uplift on the money that you put in there up to £4,000 each tax year. There aren't many places that you can earn an instant 25% return. There are restrictions. If you don't use it to buy your first home, you can't get this cash until you are 60 without paying a hefty penalty. So I don't think it's great for anybody who isn't saving for a first home. But if you are saving for a first home, it's a really good idea. And the best one there for cash is 3.5%.
Is this the peak, do you think, Simon?
Well, there's a good question. So fixed rates, potentially, we've already seen them peak, because the expectations are now that interest rates won't go up by as much as people thought they were going to go up. That's dragged it down a bit. So you saw this dramatic and rapid escalation in fixed interest rates after which adjective shall we use? Disastrous mini budget? Ill-fated mini budget? Calamitous mini budget? I don't know. One of them. That thing. That sent fixed savings rates climbing pretty high because banks were trying to pull money in. Things have died down a bit since then, and fixed savings rates have come a little bit off the boil. They've kind of plateaued and maybe come down a little bit. But easy access has continued to go up, actually. So it might be that we've still got a little bit further to go on easy access.
Before we leave this, Simon, I mentioned in the intro, don't just stick your cash or leave it in any old ISA. So we're talking about new ones, but what about existing ISAs?
Now, so this is really, really important. And this actually may have more importance for people than the new money that they put in their cash ISAs. Because let's face it, the ISA allowance is £20,000 a year. How many people are able to fill that £20,000 a year ISA allowance? Not many. There's this cost of living crisis thing going on. Inflation's been eating into people's ability to save. And I just, unless you're pretty wealthy, it's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to do that £20,000 a year. You might only be able to do a few £1,000s a year. And in all honesty, if you could get £3,000 a year into an ISA, you'd be doing pretty well. That's not bad. If you can manage to save or invest that much, you deserve a pat on the back. But you need to think as well about your existing ISA savings. And this is where people fall down, because those, once you top them all up from all years past, might add up to a fairly tidy sum, probably much more than you can manage to put into an ISA this year. But what rate are you getting on those existing ISA savings? Because if you're like many people, you opened an ISA, it had a good rate when you opened it, and it's now what's known as a legacy account, perhaps in the official terms in the industry, or they just call it an account, but what we call an insult account, where banks and building societies are taking advantage of their loyal customers by allowing the rates on very old accounts to drop to pitiful levels whilst offering great new rates to new customers. So what you need to do is you need to look at all of your existing ISA savings and then go, can I transfer them to a better rate? And the great thing about ISAs is that you can transfer them within the ISA system. It doesn't count as new money, doesn't eat up any of your allowance, and you can do this at any time of year. There's no reason to be talking about this just in the run-up to the end of the tax year, but it is when everybody thinks about this stuff. But what you want to do is you want to track down the best deals for ISA transfers, and then you want to move your money to one of those. So actually, Ed's done another article on this, and some of those deals that we highlighted just now in the 5 favorite ISAs, that you can transfer to those. So for example, Barclays 4% rate, you can transfer to that. That's a 1-year fix. Virgin Money pays 3.95%. You can transfer to that. Coventry Building Society, you can transfer to that 3.9%. If you want to fix for 2 years, you can transfer to Virgin Money. But then there's also easy access deals out there that you can transfer to. Shawbrook, 3.01%. Synergy, Coventry and Harpenden Building Society all pay 3%, and all 4 of those allow transfers in. If you want to check this stuff out, go to thisismoney.co.uk/save, where you will find all the best rates.
All right, that's it for part 1.
I'm joined now by Sam North of eToro for our weekly look at what's been going on the markets. Sam, what have we seen this week? It's been a bit of a crazy end to it, hasn't it?
It has. I said last week that the most important event from a scheduled point of view is going to be the jobs report out of the US. And there'll be some that argue it could well still be that, but there have been other stories that have gathered more attention. Silicon Valley bank are in talks to sell their assets after attempts to raise capital has failed, and their share price has been absolutely destroyed this week. Markets are on edge around that story, and maybe rightfully so, a little bit worried about contagion. Thursday was a poor day in markets, and the bank's share price specifically fell 60%. And then pre-market today on Friday also came under significant pressure. Rising interest rates, fear of a recession, a slowdown in the market for IPO offerings have all been cited as reasons for their struggles. And they're the latest small bank after Silvergate, which I'm sure some people would have heard about, to run into trouble. So is this the deck of cards falling, or is it a niche situation? I think niche, but markets hate uncertainty. On the jobs report, it was actually solid enough, if anything, and on its own would have been probably enough to send the market higher. But attention for now is elsewhere.
I mean, Silicon Valley Bank seems a long way away from Lloyds Banking Group, doesn't it, in the UK, our high street banking giant, but it's even managed to knock the FTSE banks, hasn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. It just feels like, you know, that potential contagion effect has swooped the market, and people are, you know, worried about that. As I said, markets just hate that uncertainty, and they get worried. They start thinking, what's next? And it's, bad cycle.
So what do we have to look forward to next week?
Yeah, well, potentially looking forward to something bad, I guess, if this story keeps swooping headlines. But from a scheduled point of view, next week, the focus is going to be on the latest inflation report out of the US. So that's on Tuesday. The majority of the market, you'd feel, is rightfully can be focused on that, depending on other stories. And it's the week before the next Federal Reserve meeting, so an important one. The bulls would love to see a lower inflation number. Those that are more bearish were wanting to see a higher inflation number, which will push rates higher and for longer. Elsewhere, UK jobs report Tuesday, the UK budget Wednesday, European Central Bank meeting on Thursday. So a pretty busy one, pretty interesting one. Financial markets right now are very finely poised, and the battle between the bulls and the bears is very much on.
Sam, thank you very much. We will speak to you this time next week. Hopefully with
Thank you,
some
Simon.
news.
Yes, fingers crossed.
Welcome back. 1967. The Rolling Stones released Ruby Tuesday. Elvis and Priscilla Presley got married, and amid growing protests, Martin Luther King Jr. denounced the Vietnam War. In a somewhat less headline-grabbing move, 3 investment trusts also began an illustrious 56-year career of raising dividends. The trio, City of London, Bankers and Alliance Trust, sit on top of the Dividend Heroes table compiled by investment trust body, the AIC. Simon, you have been looking into that. Before we get to the nitty-gritty of it, Tanya Jefferies, investment editor, pensions investments editor, Dividend Heroes, who are the AIC? What does this matter? Why are we talking about this? Who am I?
So the Association of Investment Companies. So they're the industry body for investment trusts. These are an investment vehicle, which is actually a share. You invest in a bunch of companies, and the vehicle you're investing in is actually listed on the stock exchange. It's called closed-ended as a result. The other investment fund is open-ended and is not listed. So that's the basic difference. There's a couple of things you need to know about investment trusts. One of the reasons that they can be dividend heroes is that they have the ability to hold money back in good years and pay it out in dividends in bad years. They're also allowed to borrow money to boost their investments if you know, in certain investing climates and so on, which makes them a little bit more risky. But as far as income investors go, it's definitely well worth having a look at investment trusts for this specific reason. And the dividend heroes are it's usually typically the ones that have been paying dividends and increasing them for 20 years in a row, but there are some that have been going for 50 years. and doing this for 50 years, they've almost made a bit of a fetish of it. But it's certainly a selling point, let's put it like that, because they do not want to break that record.
Yeah, right.
No, they do not want to. The thought of one of those that have been doing it for 50 years, it would have to be something really calamitous, I think, to make them break that. And the fact that they can hold back some cash in the better years so they can sort of keep doing this in years when they haven't done so well means they're managing it. You still can't just invest on this basis, though. I mean, for a start, you're always told, aren't you, not to look back to the past when you're making investment decisions. You're not supposed to really look at the history. You've got to look at what they're going to do for you next year and in 5 years' time and in 10 years' time. So you still need to do your research. At least they're reliable dividend payers, but have a look about what they're actually invested in, what the cost is, whether they're discounted at the moment, whether the assets are basically worth less than the current price or whether they're worth more than the current price, because you want to make a decision sort of based on that as well. Basically, you have to do all the investing homework that you would do in any other situation before you invest in one of these. But if you have got one of these already and have made some money on it, then, well done. And if you're an income investor, this is most definitely something that should be on your radar.
Simon, you've been delving into the list. What did you find?
Well, firstly, before I do that, a comment here from one of our readers. Get people to read a thoroughly boring story by headlining it with a totally unconnected link to the Rolling Stones. Busted. Gotcha. Done. Yeah, except actually they said they'd written the Rolling Stoines, Stoines. Yeah, I mean, in the trade, it's what's known as adding a bit of colour or interest.
Yeah.
So
do you need it for this article?
So
is it dull,
we do. It's painting a picture, isn't it? Of this is what was happening in 1967. Look how long ago it was. The Rolling Stones were singing Ruby Tuesday, just like they go around the world singing right now. All those years later. Yes, no, busted there. Yeah, sorry. In future, we will try to make our articles less interesting.
Exactly.
And we'll just include the boring stuff. We'll have a special section for people who just want the boring stuff. No colour, just the boring stuff. So what I think is really interesting about the Dividend Heroes list is that you would think potentially that it was just a bit Ronseal, does what it says on the tin, and it would just be a list of income investment trusts that go for dividends and pay out a nice big healthy yield. But actually it isn't. There are almost as many global funds on this list as there are UK equity income funds. And the difference between those global funds in most cases and the UK equity income funds is that equity income funds are deliberately targeting shares that pay out dividends, whereas the global funds invest all around the world. And actually the yield that you can get, the dividend yield on these trusts, ranges from a very, very chunky 6.4% from Aberdeen Equity Income, which is a UK equity income trust, to a teeny tiny 0.5% from Scottish Mortgage. What? Scottish Mortgage? That massive growth trust that invests in disruptive, innovative companies changing the world and makes stonking great gains from them, but you have to accept the fact that it might fall dramatically when things go badly wrong, as they have done over the last year. That not only pays a dividend, but it's been raising it for 40 years. Most people would be quite astonished by that. But there you go. There is a little bit of discipline there. And that does go to show, actually, as Tanya said, how some of these trusts, they know that they want to stay on this list. Now, Scottish Mortgage, over the past decade, you can't ignore what's happened over the past year, but the past year, the Scottish Mortgage's managers have always warned that things go up, things go down, and if you're going to do that kind of investing, you have to accept big falls along the way. But if you look over the past decade, its returns have been spectacular. It doesn't need to be paying a dividend, and it doesn't need to be raising that dividend. It doesn't really need to be on this list, but the trust is on this list. The trust does pay a dividend, and the trust is committed to raising that dividend. And you've got to take your hat off to that kind of thing. There is a discipline there that goes on. And so I think it's really quite interesting that. But then also, you're really not going to ever be making much income from Scottish Mortgage. But what's also interesting is if you look at some of these, and if you look at, had you invested at some point in the past into them, what would you be getting as a yield now? Because we often talk about dividend yields. In fact, we almost always talk about dividend yields, as in, if you go buy that share now, what's it going to yield? But if you buy that share now, I mean, ideally, you're going to be holding it for the next 5 years. I mean, there's lots of people who will hold any number of the trusts on here, and they've held them for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And if you take one of the trusts, F&C, for example, which is a global trust, right? It's not an income trust as such. It yields just 1.4% now. But that's with the current share price of 966p. If you'd have bought into F&C 25 years ago, a share would have cost you 192p. And you'd now be getting a yield of 7% based on what you paid for that back then, because you'll be getting the current level of payouts, but you only paid 192p. That's not going to make you as rich as Mick Jagger, I said, but it's a nice bit of icing on the cake after the shares have risen fivefold. And not only have you got shares that have risen fivefold in value, but you're also getting a chunky 7% dividend yield on it. You've been reinvesting and compounding those dividends, then you're going to be sitting there very happy indeed. So I think that's something that people need to consider as well. That's the whole thing behind long-term investing, is that the way that gains can compound over the years and dividends can compound over the years means that that's where the real gains come from being an investor, not from, I'm going to buy this share now and I'm going to get a 5% yield on it and hopefully it's going to go up, 4% or 5% over the next year and I'll have made a 10% total return. You're not investing for 1 year, you're investing for the long term. And actually, again, on that point, total return is something that people need to think about. As Tanya said, don't just buy something on this list just because it's on the list. You need to look into this stuff. You need to do your research properly. You need to make sure that it's right for you. And you need to think about total return, because some of the big yielders on here, where they are paying out yields of 4-5%, that's because you can expect much less in the way of share price growth from them than you might be able to from a trust that's paying out 2%, for example. And the only other thing to say is what I said at the end of my column: don't stick all your eggs in one basket, even if that basket does belong to a hero.
Right, finally, could you afford your home now? The rapid rise in mortgage rates over the past year has dramatically reduced what people can borrow based on the same monthly payments. So what are the implications of this, and how big a mortgage could you get now? Tanya, just explain what's been happening to mortgage rates. Simon mentioned ill-fated. I think ill-fated is my favourite of the words that you use for the mini budget. That had an impact, did it not?
Yes, absolutely. They shot up and they've been coming slowly down. The fall seems to have stalled a bit. I think you discussed this in the podcast last week, but it's still looking better. The longer you can hold out, the better. Just as an aside, I've just remortgaged, and the very helpful person who I talked to said, okay, we're going for this rate now. I got a not terribly good, but okay, 4.44%. Up though from, I don't know, 1-point-something%, so still quite big jump. But she said, look, call again. It doesn't actually go into effect until the 31st of March. And if our rates improve and you ring back within, say, a week of that, then we might be able to move you on to the better rate if it's gone down. So I thought that was incredibly helpful. But back to the overall situation, yeah, I think things are improving, but there's an awful lot of people who are on rates of under 2% and have got to remortgage and are going to be looking at much higher rates when they remortgage, as I did. And it is a big worry for people. But going back to what you were saying about, could you afford your own home now? I wonder if I could get a mortgage to buy the home I'm sitting in now, I do wonder whether that would be possible now. I would probably be buying somewhere smaller in a different place, which was more affordable.
Simon, could you afford your home now?
I would struggle to. The size of our mortgage at the rate that we're on, we were lucky. We fixed for 5 years when we moved in 2020 and literally this is just how the problem with this, as we've spoken about before, is this is how the lottery works in this system. Is our mortgage doesn't run out, our fix doesn't run out until 2025, but only because we moved in 2020. I mean, that's literally just the lottery element. Had you moved 2 years later, you might have fixed and you might have another 2 years. Had you moved 2 years before, you'd be staring down the barrel of your mortgage ending very soon. Or if you took a 2-year fix, for example, there is a real lottery system going on here, which is magnified by the fact that interest rates have risen so fast in such a short space of time. Now, I'm a great proponent of the argument that interest rates need to be getting back to a more normal level and staying there. And I've been banging the drum on that for years. But I also think that we are potentially undercooking the effect of quite how dramatically they've gone up and quite how much this is going to affect people's budgets. And yeah, my mortgage would cost me an awful lot more if I had to take it out now. And there's a lot of people staring down the barrel of that. But we ran some numbers here. So just to put a bit of context here, if you think about this from the perspective of most people have a certain amount each month that they can afford to pay on their mortgage. Now, they might be able to find a bit more, but it's harder because inflation's been double digits, cost of living crisis, energy bills are up, food bills are up, fuel, petrol bills are up, everything else is up. So it's got harder to be able to afford more. And that's all been outstripping wages, but they might be able to find a little bit more. But let's work on the basis that someone could afford the same amount that they could afford about a year ago. Now, about a year ago, when you could get a mortgage at an average rate of 2.5%, if you had £100,000 a month that you could afford to go on a mortgage, over a 25-year term, you could borrow £221,000. Now, you could only borrow £169,000. If you had £1,500 that you could afford to go every month on your mortgage, then back when the rates were 2.5%, you could have got a mortgage that was £332,000. Now, with rates at 5%, you could get one that's £254,000. £2,000, it's £442,000 in the past, and it's now £338,000. And if you've got a bumper amount to go on your mortgage of £2,500 a month, well, if you had the salary to get someone to lend you this, okay, and that's the difficult bit, then what that would have bought in mortgage terms about a year ago when rates were at 2.5% was £553,000 worth of mortgage. Now it only buys £423,000 worth of mortgage. So you can see there, this big gap reflects how people would just not be able to pay the same amount for properties that they could when rates were lower, because the mortgage that they can buy with the same monthly payments is a much smaller level. And unless they've got, in the case of going at the middle ground here, unless they've got an extra £80,000 knocking around that they can put into the house, then there's an impact there for the price that people can afford to pay for houses. And that is why house prices are coming down and have come down by quite a bit since last kind of autumn time.
So what can borrowers do? Well,
there are some things you can do that means you can borrow more. Whether you should do them is another question. You can extend the term of your mortgage. So these are tricks that lenders have already been pulling in order to enable people to buy more and more expensive properties and borrow more and more, because mortgages are done on an affordability basis now. They're not done on a multiple of salary. And on an affordability basis, the lender looks at your incomings and your outgoings, and then it works out, with that monthly payment, can you afford it? And ways to get that monthly payment down include extending the term of the mortgage overall. So instead of borrowing over 25 years, you borrow over 30. Most new mortgages are now written on 30-year terms. Not so long ago, that was 25-year terms was standard. and many are now being written on 35 or 40-year terms. One thing that people can do if they already have a mortgage and they're remortgaging is they can extend the term. So say, for example, you fixed 5 years ago, you bought your home, 30-year term, fixed 5 years ago, mortgage is coming up, you're now on 25 years. Well, ideally, you'd stick with 25 years because you want to get that mortgage cleared and costing yourself the least amount of interest. But you could stretch what you can afford by pushing it back up to 30. Now, the danger of this game is you just keep doing it time and time again, and you never end up actually paying off the mortgage. There will come a point where the lender goes, sorry, sunshine, this whole retirement thing, you're pushing into that, and we're going to have to stop extending that term. But lenders are surprisingly okay with pushing terms out at the moment. That's one of the things you can do. And then some of the other things you can do is just downgrade your expectations and actually accept that, you know what, this has an impact across the whole property market. There are, 30% of homes are bought for cash. Those people don't have mortgages, but the rest of the property market is mortgaged. And so this has an effect on what people can pay. And so therefore it should bring down prices. So, if you're selling, expect less. If you're buying, try to buy for less. And remember that overall, everybody paying less for homes and not more and more and more and more is a good thing, because it means that you end up paying much less interest to the bank over the course of your life. And really the only big winners from high house prices are banks and building societies.
Indeed. All right, that's it. Thank you very much, both. You can keep up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app. And if you have any comments or questions for the team or anything you'd like them to look into, Simon?
You can email us at editor@thisismoney.co.uk. You can tweet us at thisismoney, or you can come to thisismoney.co.uk/podcast to find all podcasts past and join in the debate in reader comments and tell us off for trying to add interest to financial stories.
How dare you, Simon? How dare you make it fun and interesting? And if you like our podcast, why not rate us wherever you found us? It helps other people find us too.
Don't forget, you can stay on top of what's going on in the markets by tuning in to the Digest and Invest podcast by eToro. Go to your regular podcast platform and listen on the go. Digest and Invest by eToro, the podcast for those interested in trading and investing.